Me, a bro.
Yep.
He, a dude.
That's good stuff. All right. Let's try it. Okay. Welcome to the We Will Journey podcast. We're talking about faith and life as it happens, and not the glossy exterior we wish it was.
Ah,
What, man? What did I do
no,
wrong?
I think you said it's because all the things I was thinking about before. But we can edit that. You got that part good.
Oh.
You got it good. Okay.
Okay. All right.
Okay, just
Now it's your turn.
good.
Yeah.
Wait. We're gonna get under the surface. I should have said all those things before. We should have waited. Down and dirty until after we read this part.
Okay.
Okay. Wait. We get under the surface and explore the down and dirty. Okay. Maybe we should. It doesn't have to be word for word, right?
No. I mean, I gave an interpretation.
Okay. All right. We get under the surface and explore the down and dirty of life as it pertains to our beliefs, our relationships, politics, and absolutely everything else.
Oh, there we go. That was good. All right. Are you digging our theme music? Well, we dig it too. You can check out more Jane Gilman music at her website, janegilman.com. Or you can download some of her music to your playlist on iTunes. That's Gillman.
3, 2, 1.
Good afternoon to you,
Good
Seth.
afternoon.
How's it going, man?
It's going quite well. Good morning to you, my friend.
All right.
You've sent your kids off to school?
Yes. The kids and my wife are at school. And today is technically my study day, which obviously has not started yet. But so yeah, today is the day that I use to study and many times record a podcast with you. So,
Well, I appreciate you letting this butt into your study time a little bit. Maybe, I don't know, do you feel like once in a while, like our discussion, because I feel like a few times we've talked about things that kind of have something to do with your studies currently. Do you ever feel like there's a benefit in this, or does it always just feel like this is good, but it's kind of taking away from the other thing?
No, I love what we do. Sometimes, yes, what if I read a book or, whatever it is that happens to tie in to our conversation, it's great. Or sometimes we can build a conversation around something that I read or I'm working on. But yeah, so I think it's been fantastic. And I think our interview with Claus, I'm saying it wrong. It's actually Claus, like Santa Claus, right? Claus. Yeah, I thought that, excuse me, I thought that was a lot of fun. And so that was that was an enjoyable interview. I had kind of forgot about really how the conversation went. And even in editing the conversation, I didn't go through the whole thing and listen to it. So that was actually a lot of fun to listen to again. And he was a great guy to have on our podcast. And so I'll look forward to having him on again. And by now, I'm guessing this relationship that we talked about has progressed quite a bit. So I'd be interested to know if that took off or if that kind of, went the other way. Oh, maybe man. You already know. Do you already know the details to that, Seth?
I don't. Even if I did, I don't know if I would be the appropriate platform to share that. I guess. Anyways, I'm going to talk to him sometime soon. I'm looking forward to meeting up with him.
Cool.
And we might this weekend, and so then I will have more information. But yeah, he's a solid guy, and really fun and really encouraging, and has definitely been a good part and highlight of my life this last year and a half.
Yeah, he's very thoughtful, and I think Claus is somebody that really gives just a lot of thought to things before he interjects his own opinion, and that's something that especially on this platform, Seth, I've found myself I'm too quick to generalize, and I'm too quick to just throw things in the mix sometimes that maybe I should think about a little more before I do that. But
Right.
I guess that's part of the nature of this thing. So sometimes we do that. I know we've had to go back and maybe say, this is what I meant, or I've thought about this more, and want to add something new to it, whatever we originally stated. That kind of happened. So the reason we released our interview with Claus is because that basically happened in another discussion we had. So we kind of pulled the reins back on that conversation. Not that we won't release a part of that at some point in time, but I went down a political road that after listening to it, I'm like, I don't know if that's really what we want on our podcast or not. So we're just going to take another look at it and take a little more time to think about it before we put it out there. But you did have some great thoughts on a book that you're reading. So I don't think that conversation will be totally lost. We'll probably put out some short piece of that. So that still is something that people can kind of take in and think about. But anyways, today, Seth, I think we're going to talk about pastors, and specifically pastors that fail in some capacity in their life, and therefore, because of that failure, probably have to leave probably like a fuller version of their ministry, and kind of have to at least scale back or maybe leave it altogether. And that's something that has become a big part of being a kind of a celebrity pastor. It seems like that many of these people are having pretty significant issues in their lives, and I think the challenging part for us as Christians is, now what do we do with all the stuff that we listen to, and how do we feel about it? So that was something that you were kind of thinking about, Seth. So I'll just let you kick off here and talk about some of your thoughts to start with.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of this morning I was listening to and watching some different interviews and discussions between pastors. There was this thing that I find it really cool, because that's the kind of content and the kind of stuff that I enjoy is more the discussion interview format, more so than just like teaching. I love teaching and preaching, but I also love like seeing believers, and especially like smart pastors and teachers discuss topics, or like debates between non-Christians and Christians, that kind of thing. And a few years ago, and they did it like I think like two or 3 years in a row, there was this thing, and you can watch them on YouTube. There was this thing where it's like, I want to say like 8 different pastors that are pretty prominent, got together and had basically just discussions on different hot topics. And so I was watching one of those because I really enjoyed it. And Mark Driscoll was one of the guys that was a part of that. And so then that led me to, thinking about him some more. And I watched John Piper on his podcast talk about Mark Driscoll and his relationship to Mark Driscoll. And this was after, so Mark Driscoll had, kind of started and led a church for a number of years and ended up stepping down because there was different, and I don't even I don't even know all the details. I remember back then, I read some of it, and I think a lot of it had to do just his kind of the way he interacted with people. He was kind of very dominant, or
I think he was a bit of a bully.
Yeah,
and yeah, it would maybe be the easiest way to describe it.
And so, and from everything I've read, I've never heard anything that it was a sexual failure or sexual involvement or adultery or anything like that. But it was, like you said, it seemed to be more with how he interacted with staff and how he sort of got too much power and abused that power. And so a lot of his good friends, including John Piper, sort of stepped in, and I don't know how all that works in his denomination or whatever, and who's like the head of that, but basically he lost his ministry and he stepped down and whatnot, and now he's a few years ago started up again. He's away for a couple of years and had counseling and did a bunch of things. And so this interview with John Piper, he was answering a question about how he viewed his relationship to Mark Driscoll, and also if he had regrets for being associated with Driscoll and his ministry. And they preached at each other's churches. They had a friendship. They would get together. They had a real relationship, not just like, hey, we see each other at a conference or whatever. And so it kind of gets on the topic in general of how do we view fallen leaders in the church, whether it be a pastor, like you said, or the leader of a Christian, movement or ministry. The latest example of that being Ravi Zacharias, right? We maybe mentioned that recently. Yeah. But so one of the things that John Piper said, he kind of had different points that he mentioned in different ways that he answered that question. But one of the things he said is that we as leaders and we as Christians don't always see our flaws and don't always see our sin. And he said, there's a lot of things that Mark was doing that weren't right and weren't the way, wasn't Christ-like. But then there was other things where he said, it's not really clear, if he actually was that way or he actually did that or whatever. But then there's also the things where he really didn't necessarily see his flaws. And then it got into, even figures in the Bible, and he brought up, it's Paul and Barnabas, right, who split up because they can't agree and they go their separate ways. About John Mark. And he said, obviously there was something going on. They couldn't have both been completely right. They each, or at least Paul had his issues, and he didn't seem to see those, but then they went on their own way and had separate ministries, at least for a while, and God bless those things. And it's really interesting because it brings up this thing of, well, if you don't see your flaws, are you really to blame? But the answer would be yes. But then God uses flawed people all the time, and so it's kind of like, okay, where's the point where we obviously people are going to make mistakes no matter what line of whatever kind of path you pursue in life, whatever role you're in. But as a pastor, as a leader of ministry, at what point is it like, this is irredeemable, or this person is no longer allowed to ever do ministry again? This person's never allowed to lead a church. This person's never allowed to be over others in a shepherding role. That's kind of a fascinating thing and an interesting discussion.
Well, we have just a lot of different examples. So you mentioned Ravi Zacharias, who was an apologist. And he was actually ordained through the same denomination that I'm with.
Uh-huh.
And then I'm forgetting the guy that was the pastor for the Hillsong Church. I'm forgetting his name right now, but they're in New York. Carl Lentz, yeah. There was so that's a pastor, and then a Christian apologist, Jerry Falwell Jr., who is the president of a Christian university, recently had his issues. Bill Hybel was another high-profile pastor that had some issues recently. There's a comedian, the Christian comedian, John Crist. Is it Crist? Yeah, John Crist. He also had some issues with being faithful to his wife, and maybe it wasn't his wife even. Were they engaged or something? I don't know.
Yeah, there was some text and stuff happening, and him kind of...
Yeah. I think it was even maybe more substantial than that. But I know I listened to another podcast recently where, and I don't remember his name at all, but he got involved with that website, Ashley Madison. It's basically like a hookup website. He was a pastor, and that one really interested me because of the way he talked about it.
Okay.
He was kind of dismissive of it, and it's like when you get caught doing something you shouldn't be doing, but you say, well, I was just doing this, and you don't really disclose the full extent of your actual sin. you try to cover aspects of it up to some extent. It definitely felt like he was doing a little bit of that in how he described his involvement with that website, and ultimately what that website's all about. So we just have like a lot of people that are prominent recently having issues with that. And I think part of that is probably because people within the evangelical Christian community, it's become bigger, and therefore we have more celebrity within the community. And so I think when your community gets larger, it becomes bigger as far as more commercial. And there's money to be made within the community as pastors, apologists, comedians, all these things. Like there's a market now, and so that means there's money to be made. And so when you have that kind of dynamic going on, I think it just lends itself to what's going on more probably than what it used to, say, 50 years ago. But yeah, it's all over because it's just so interesting. We were talking about the fact that, today is my study day. Well, there have been books that I've read that reference, say, well, in particular, like Bill Hybel is the one that I'm thinking about. So as I was going through this book about discipleship, they referenced Bill Hybel's church and how they were doing everything really well when it came to discipleship. But by the time I read the book, he'd already had to resign. Like that whole thing had already fallen apart. So that was kind of interesting reading that book and just knowing that whole thing had kind of fallen apart because of this guy's moral failures. And so anyways, it's a weird dynamic that kind of exists in our Christian culture today that we're having to kind of figure out ways to deal with. Another experience I had was there's this group called Beautiful Eulogy from Portland, Oregon.
Yeah, I know them.
And they have like these sermon jam type things in some of their albums. Mm-hmm. And I thought, I'm going to have to check out this pastor. And so I checked out the pastor, and probably within a year or two prior to me, hearing about him, he had to resign from leadership because of having an affair with another woman, so it's just crazy. It's a crazy thing. I think Ravi Zacharias is the one that really hits home for most people because he had a profound impact on the Christian community, and then like outside of the Christian community as well. Like his ministry just had a far reach into our world, and so like really coming to terms with that is difficult. A lot of people have been pretty broken up about that, and yeah, so it's like, what do we do with all this? What do we do? How do we feel about it? Do we kind of dismiss everything that they taught and relearn it, or do we, keep it? So there's just a lot of things that I think we're all kind of like, how do we proceed? How do we proceed from here?
Email. That's right, I said email. Seems like everybody's got one these days, even us. So if you want to get in contact with us or chat about the weather, you can shoot us an email at wewilljourney.connect@gmail.com. Look forward to hearing from you or reading from you. And it's interesting too when we talk about like the teachings and the impact that a lot of these guys made, and then it turns out they were living immoral lives, where they fell into something. I mean, some of it could be just like, all of a sudden they get tempted and they fall into something and they have an affair or something, or it could be something that's going on for years and years. There's all these different situations. I think that's really a crazy one, is when you've like followed somebody for years or even like a decade, and then you find out like this whole time they've been doing this thing. But one thing, also a point that John Piper brought up is, we have a lot of flawed people who have said and done some really, and written some profound things, and he said, the more distance you get from that, the more it kind of just like you see that thing as what it is. If it's like a really profound, impactful book on theology that someone wrote, right? 30, 40 years later, you're probably not even going to identify that with the person who wrote it. Or you're not going to identify that person with his flaws necessarily. And so he was saying, like, he thinks, especially, I mean, he was talking about Mark Driscoll a lot specifically, but like, there wasn't things being taught, he said, that he disagreed with or he thought were like
heretical.
Yeah. there wasn't like heresy and stuff like that. So that's the thing that's so difficult is separating the messenger from the message. And I don't
Yeah.
know. I mean, for us to damn someone for having a moral failure and throwing everything out that they've ever done and said is also very hypocritical, obviously, for most of us. And also, I don't think that's how God uses people, because David is the person probably that is David and Paul would be two of the people that have most impacted the Christian faith, outside of Jesus, obviously. And we read their writings all the time and teach from them and about them. And David obviously had huge moral failure. Paul, most of his stuff happened before he converted, but then there's things where, like Piper brought up the split with Barnabas, where he obviously put some personal hard feelings or whatever in the way of things. And so we don't just like throw all that out, but at the same time, when someone does it, when someone happened, and obviously with Ravi Zacharias, it's too late for anything with that, but like there has to be consequences, right? There has to be that. But does that mean we throw away everything they've done and we can't adhere to their teaching? Or I don't think that's the case, but
yeah. Well, it's difficult because I had an experience where I had a personal relationship with somebody who claimed to be something that he really wasn't. And he was also very active in ministry. And I don't really associate with him anymore. And I can't say that I really want to. And it isn't just because of that. It's just, he's just not a part of my life anymore for a lot of different reasons. But, but yeah, it's challenging to set aside like your personal feelings about something and look at those things a little more objectively. And also when God seems to be using somebody that is just really deeply flawed. I mean, that doesn't really make a lot of sense to us because I think a lot of times many of us feel like we're above all of that. Mm-hmm. And the reality is we're not above all of that. And even if we aren't struggling with something that we would consider to be really substantial, like, cheating on a spouse or some sort of sexual addiction of some kind that may not actually be a physical affair, or alcohol, drugs, money, whatever it is. Even if we're not struggling with something like that, I think we fail to realize how little it would take for us to actually struggle with something like that. The steps between, us not struggling with it and struggling with it, they're very few, and they're not that far apart, because our human nature is just very prone to these kind of sins, And so if we don't want to struggle with them, I think it actually requires us to set up kind of an extreme, like just a really, I would say like more on the offensive, right? So like offense versus defense, in like a sports type application. We have to take the offensive with protecting our hearts and our minds from falling into these types of sins. Otherwise, naturally, we're just going to fall into them if we're not careful. And I think that's the thing that we see in most of the lives of these people that we're talking about today is that they probably had very little accountability in their life.
Mm-hmm.
And organizationally, they just did not set up enough safeguards for themselves to succeed, in these areas that we're all very prone to. And I also think anytime you add success into the mix, so it's one thing if you're, a small town pastor, you have some small ministry of some kind. But as soon as that small thing becomes a big thing, and you're being asked to speak places, and you're making money, and people are constantly kind of praising your efforts, it just really opens the floodgate of sin to creep into your life,
An
Seth, opportunity, right? I've heard Colin Cowherd. I listen to his show quite a bit.
Yeah.
And he talks about professional athletes versus the common guy. And the fact that we as just normal guys cannot imagine the amount of opportunity that comes their way when it comes to relationships.
Mm-hmm.
The availability to them is just kind of unreal, I guess, according to Colin Cowherd, and so you and I, Seth, being normal dudes, we just don't experience that kind of, that life. And I'm honestly very thankful for that.
Amen.
I'm thankful that I'm not, having to deal with that. But, there's definitely a human element to all of this that we need to acknowledge. Failure, even as a Christian, just kind of as who we are. We are flawed. We are going to fail. In some capacity, we all fail all the time. So we like to delineate between types of failure, and this failure is worse than that failure. But really, all of our failure points to our human condition, which is kind of a common sin issue that we're born into and we all experience. And because, in our humanness, we create levels of sin. Some are worse than others, and obviously some have much more impact than others. That's, murder and rape, and some of these things are awful, and they affect more lives than, say, me saying something mean to you. So if I snap back at you in regards to something you say to me, we can resolve that issue pretty quickly. But if I kill you because of something you say to me,
gosh.
that's a whole nother thing, right? Like that's
It has
I can't resolve
reverberations.
Yeah, I can't undo what that would do to your wife and children, and your friends. Like, that's done at that point in time. If I say something to you that's mean and nasty, it's not going to affect them as much. So obviously the impact of our sin has, just different levels of impact. So
there's a couple good good things there and stuff that I'm thinking about. One of them is, I think no matter how big, popular, and and famous you are, or no matter if you're in a tiny little countryside church, I think often the temptations can be similar. It's more like you said, like the access and the access to them and the opportunity is different. But I think the same principle and the same thing applies to, as far as if you are that person in leadership, you need to be vulnerable, you need to be open, you need to be accountable to other people. And one thing I've realized and I've seen is you can have as many safeguards, you can have as many accountability partners, you can have an awesome team. But if you, as the individual, as the leader, as the pastor, whatever, are not willing to take the step and go to that person, if I'm not going to go to you, Tyler, and say like, hey man, I'm tempted with this right now, I'm struggling with this, I gotta tell you about it, and we gotta pray about it, and whatever, then nothing's going to happen. It still has to be that step for me, because I've seen, even in our own organization, right? We work with the Evangelical Free Church of America with their international missions branch, right? And about the time we started, the person who was leading at that point also had and I never found out the details of that either, but it was definitely some sort of adultery in that direction, and obviously, was or stepped down, was fired, whatnot, and taken out of his position. And that is something that's close to me and to us and to many colleagues of ours. And the people that were his kind of core didn't know anything. They didn't even kind of assume that anything was happening. And then and then it did. And I know for me personally, I've worked really close with teams. I have a wife who is amazing, and we share and are open with each other. But there's still temptations I've had, or struggles where I've had, where I have had to take this step to tell people about it, and they had no idea, that I was being tempted or that I was struggling with that issue. And so I think that's the key, is we need both. And that's one thing that I'm really proud of and encouraged by our missions organization, the E-Free Church, is they have established a really good kind of top-down setup now, where there is a lot of openness. There is a lot of, I think we're really connected, and people are really vulnerable, and we know the leadership a lot better now. Excuse me. But at the end of the day, I still think you being that person who's struggling with that thing or has those temptations, is convicted by the Holy Spirit, you've got to take the step, right? And you need friends to point those out. You need friends to be there for you. You need people to hold you accountable, but they can't really hold you accountable if they don't know what they're holding you to an extent. And that's one thing that was fascinating with John Piper, is he said his only regret was that he did not help Mark, and that he did not Mark Driscoll, and that he did not wasn't more of a support, wasn't more of an accountability person in his life. And I've heard that also, with the situation with our organization, heard the same kind of things from leadership people, is they, they wish they could have done more, right? And I understand that, obviously, and I think there's times where we can, but you also can't take the responsibility out of someone's hands. So that's the thing that is interesting.
There is that balance there, because ultimately, if we want to hide our sin, we're pretty darn good at hiding it. If we want to keep something from the people that are closest to us, we work pretty hard at it to make sure that happens. But I think there's also an element to who do we put around ourselves. Sometimes, in leadership, we will put people around ourselves that are kind of just like cheerleader types. We may alienate the person that really knows us well, so we can get away with a little more, and we keep the cheerleaders close to us that just kind of tell us what we want to hear, because I think there is something to, if you have the people that are closest to you around you and really know you well, even if you're doing a really great job of hiding whatever the sin issue is that you're trying to keep hidden, there's always little things that are kind of like giveaways, you know? There's always something just a little bit off in that person's life. And nobody probably can put their finger on it, but the people that really know that person know that something's off. It's just the fact that a lot of times in those situations that those people don't always push back, you know, on what is off. You know, they're like, man, yeah, I noticed something was off, but I just never questioned him about it. You know, like you hear that a lot. You know, like I could tell something was wrong, but I just didn't know what. And I didn't want to make him feel bad, or I didn't want to go down that path, you know, whatever it was, but something was up. I just knew it, you know, and like my sister, for example, like if certain types of things are going on in her life, she quits calling me, you know, and so every time that she just basically goes cold turkey on calling me and basically avoids any kind of discussion, like I know, like this is probably a good time to like interject, you know, like say, hey, how things going? What's up? You know, what's new? But so those people closest to us, they have like these little tells that help us understand that something is up and that we probably should dig a little deeper. And so yeah, I mean, both things are obviously present. You know, I'm sometimes amazed at just how big our sin issues can get and how clueless the people around us can be about them. You know, even we had a situation here in a church that we were involved with where the pastor of that church didn't just have one affair. I mean, he had numerous affairs.
Wow.
And it was just over the period of like 10 years. We weren't present when he was there, but anyways, the ripple effects of that were still happening when we went to that church. And I mean, it's just amazing, you know, it blows your mind to think that could take place, but it does happen. And, you know, it's just part of the world we live in, but I think there has to be an acknowledgement at some point in time, like this is who we are as people. We can't run from our sin nature. You know, we may try to run from it, but we cannot run from our sin nature. And so it goes back to, as followers of Christ, eventually we have to acknowledge it. You know, eventually we just have to come clean with who we are at our very core. And at our very core, we're just broken people. And so if we want people to perceive us as not broken, as above our nature, I think we're setting ourselves, especially when it comes to ministry, we're setting ourselves up for a lot of failure. If we want people to perceive us as above all of that, I think we're just asking for it. You know, we're essentially just asking for this failure to come our way. But I think if we approach ourselves with a lot of humility and a lot of transparency and openness and just kind of come clean, say, listen, these are my struggles. These are my tendencies. These are the things that can cause me to stumble, you know, and fall into some sin. If we do that, like on the front end, with the people around us, then I think we set ourselves up for a lot more success. You know, if people are aware, like, oh, you know, he probably should not be in whatever this situation is, you know, like these are the situations that he should not be in. And as those situations kind of arise, right? And then, if we're not noticing it, then the people around us can say, hey, you know, can I join in here, you know, and kind of step in and know that, hey, this is not a situation that he's going to just automatically succeed in. He may struggle with this. And that way, then the people that are closest to us can start to kind of like tune in and realize that, hey, he probably is going to need a little bit of help here. or she may need some help here. But there's like we look to pastors and Christian celebrities as role models. And so we put a lot of probably unrealistic expectations on them. And then when they fall, it's like this big thing, and then a lot of people from outside can point their finger and say, see, look at that guy, they're not what they said they were. And the reality is none of us ever have been what we probably have claimed to be anyways, our sin runs really deep and if we're claiming to be above something, that should really be the moment where outsiders point and say, something's wrong with that dude. The claim about being above all of that should be the thing that really, causes the red flag to go off because, we're not above it. Nobody is. I don't care who you are.
Hey guys, it's Seth. Some of you might be wondering, I wish there was a way to follow these guys and what they're up to. Well, I don't know if you heard about a little thing called the internet. That's right. If you check us out at twitter.com/WeWillJourney1, you'll be able to keep updated on what we're up to and maybe some future interviews or projects we're working on. Catch yous later. Amen. And I think in a lot of ways, it shouldn't be so surprising when someone who's a celebrity, someone who has a big name and status, falls, for the simple reason that the more famous you become, whether you're a politician, athlete, actor, church leader, is usually the more big you become, the more you are off on your own, not connected to those who are your foundation, that being your family, your wife, and your close friends. And some of those people recognize that and they travel with their wives. Some of those people recognize that they have like this core team of close people who know them well. But I mean, I wouldn't want to be gone like some of these people like 6 to 9 months of the year, like traveling around, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like that would not be good for me. You know what I mean? And
right.
And it's just kind of, there's a lot of things that I think people, or I think we think, oh, I'm doing a good thing, I'm going out, especially, as we're talking about church leaders, pastors, like I'm doing a good thing, I'm teaching, I'm spreading the word, I'm loving others, like, it's worth it. Where in the end, like,
mm-hmm.
Yeah, you're kind of just setting yourself up for falling at some point. And I think also, it says a lot about us as men in most of these situations. We're talking about male leaders. I'm sure there's both sides. But typically, in evangelical circles, it's if someone's a pastor or a leader, it's a male figure. And that's the thing is, as men, we struggle so much with being open and vulnerable, and that's something we can learn so much
mm-hmm.
from our sisters in Christ, from our spouses, is being vulnerable and being open about things that we struggle with. Because I think a lot of times it's as easy as that solution, and rather as, thinking somehow being masculine and being strong is stuffing those things down and pretending that everything's okay, or pretending like, oh, I'll just get through it, like, that I've maybe been drinking a little bit too much on the weekends, but like it's not gonna affect me, and nobody else needs to know
mm-hmm.
about it. Or this
right.
girl, she's kind of attractive and she seems to be hanging around me a lot, but it's like it's not gonna affect me. I'm strong, I'm this and that.
No, I don't think you really think that, though. I don't think.
And it's not. And I'm not saying you think it, but well, I don't know. I guess I can just speak for myself. There's times where I think like it'll just pass, and I'm not necessarily talking about
right.
those things specifically. But that's more where I've got in trouble and where the Holy Spirit has had to slap me around a little bit, and I need to be vulnerable with people, is with that kind of like, oh, it'll just kind of take care of itself, or it'll pass, right? That's and it's different for other people, but I think being strong and being a leader and being manly means being vulnerable. I think those have to be connected in how Christ-like father and leader of a family and of a church. Those are connected with being vulnerable and being open and not being conqueror, of our issues by ourselves.
Well, I think what's interesting is probably if you would go and, at some point in time after this person has had time to think about what happened, I'm guessing that as it was happening, they probably knew that there was a pretty good possibility that this could be the end. This could be how it ended. Mm-hmm. I think the reality is most of the time we know ourselves pretty well, mm-hmm. whether we want to be honest about it or not. We know the kinds of situations that we're going to probably fail in. And I'm guessing here, but as whatever it is that we're doing is growing and becoming bigger and bigger and bigger, and we're becoming more successful and we're engaging more, and we're finding more success. I'm just guessing here that these people knew probably in that moment, like this is probably going to end bad.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so what I think is probably even more interesting than the failure itself is the fact that most of the time I think we know these things are probably going to happen, and we proceed anyways. Does that make sense? So it's the fact that we know ourselves well enough, mm-hmm. and we see this wave coming, and maybe we're riding the wave of success, but we do it anyways. And I think that speaks to the fact that success and celebrity and authority and just all the good things that come with some of these things that we're talking about are bigger or more appealing than not failing.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, even though I may lose my marriage, I may lose my ministry, I may lose whatever, I'm willing to take that risk in order to have it, in order to have the celebrity, and in order to have the success. I'm willing to risk all this other stuff in order to experience that for however long that may last, and that to me, I think, is just really interesting about just kind of who we are as human beings. We just have this desire to experience that. Mm-hmm. And saying no to that is very difficult. And even if we can kind of see it coming, and I think, if we're honest, most of us probably can. Like, I know there's certain situations I just shouldn't be in. Like there's just things that like I don't want to open that door, because I know that I may not succeed if that door is opened. And so I just try to put enough safeguards in my life where I don't have to, go down that path, and I try to say no to certain things. Mm-hmm. Francis Chan, he talked about it. Mm-hmm. In his own life, he talked about the fact that he just doesn't like being alone with other women. Mm-hmm. And that some women find him a little rude. Mm-hmm. And because he just won't give them the time of day. And he's like, I'm just trying to protect my marriage. I'm trying to protect my my relationship with God. He's like, I'm just trying to protect, because I know that, if I'm in this situation, that there's a chance I could fail, because I know myself well enough. He's like, I know what my struggles have been. And I just don't want to put myself in that situation. So I sometimes do come off as a little short, a little rude. And, he's like, I'm just trying to keep myself safe, and I think that's a perfectly valid way to approach our brokenness, is just to not let ourselves be in that situation. And, Seth, you know me and I know you pretty well. And if you started describing a situation to me that you were in, and I knew that this may cause you issues, I would immediately say something. And I would immediately question you about it, right? Because I know you that well. And you would do the same thing for me. And I mean, even if we hint at it, I think sometimes jokingly we'll say something to each other, that like, oh, how's that going? Or, because we just know each other that well, and we connect on a regular basis. And,
yeah, and I've gotten a lot of pushback. It's interesting you bring that up with Francis Chan. Like, I have that. I also have that same mindset. Not only like trying to very much avoid being alone with other women, but just in general having the mindset of certain things are not okay for me to do because I'm weak. And I've gotten pushback from also a lot of Christians who say, like, how can you have that mindset? Like, you're just going to set yourself up, like if you never do that, then, you're going to be, put yourself in a box, or you're going to not have freedom, or you're not going to, be able to, you're always going to like feel guilty about things. Or I don't know, like all these different stuff. And I've had that conversations also with certain people, multiple times, especially about the women, about being alone with the opposite sex. But to me, I just know like the risk is never greater than the reward. Me maybe being able to help a woman who needs some counsel or something is not worth it to me, to what could happen, right? In that sense. For me, when you know your weakness, when you know that you're not strong, and you have guidelines and you have accountability, that's when you really have true freedom. I don't think you have freedom. Like for me, I'm not totally free if I just say like, I'm going to do whatever I want and I have no consequences. Or I'm going to do whatever I want because I have the Holy Spirit. It's like this discussion of, I'm going to go to the strip bar so I can evangelize all my work colleagues, that kind of thing. It's like, well, maybe you should talk to them when you're at work.
Well, I know as a young man, Seth, before I really started following Christ, I grew up in a home that, we attended church. And so I knew, just like Bill, when we talked to Bill, he's like, I knew my sin issues. And I was the same way. Like I knew, my sin issues. I knew what was wrong in my life. But as a young man, I had no expectation to overcome them. I fully expected to give in to whatever they were. Like there was no, I didn't even attempt, to try to overcome them before I was following Christ, but every night I had a very similar prayer, which was, Lord, just forgive me. I really don't want to go to hell, so, it kind of went like that. But there was no attempt on my part to avoid the situations, to have success in these situations. It was pretty much an acknowledgement, like, this is who I am. This is at the core of who I am. That's just who I am. And that hasn't changed. Like at my core, I'm still that guy. The only difference now is that I have the Holy Spirit interceding for me, and But if I want to, I don't have to accept his help.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and that has to be something that we all are very aware of. Like that we don't have to accept the help of the Holy Spirit. We still have free will. God isn't going to do it for us. He will give us the help we need, but it's still up to us to accept the help. And so that acknowledgement should be pretty maybe frightening and humbling, you know, in a lot of ways. Like, a lot of people think that once I come to Christ, these things are just going to totally dissipate. You know, I'm not going to have these issues anymore. And that couldn't be further from the truth. Our free will extends into our relationship with Christ. We don't become robots once we choose to follow Christ. We still retain our ability to choose. And, so I know we're kind of coming up on an hour here, Seth. So we probably should kind of wind it down, but I don't know. Do you have any other final thoughts, man?
No, just, I mean, something that I don't do enough is pray for our leaders, you know, pray for our pastors, pray for those who are in those kind of situations.
Mm-hmm.
And for me and for us and any Christian, just have, you need to be vulnerable. And it's right at that time when you think like, it's not a big deal. Or like, you know, like, I mean, or for me, especially, you know, there's that level of embarrassment you have to get over, especially if it's something maybe like you've been tempted by before or struggled with before and you've talked to people about. And so then you're like, I don't want to bother this person. I don't want to talk to them about it because, you know, we already went through this. And
yeah,
just do it, you know, like, I've needed people. I've been weak so many times, and I've needed people multiple times to be there for me and to ask me intruding questions and to and encourage me and to pray for me, you know. And people like my, you know, even when I was a young teenager, you know, my brother just being like, so pornography, masturbation, what's going on? You know,
right.
Things like that where it's like, well, funny you ask.
I have no idea what you're talking about. Like, I don't know what you just said.
What?
Foreign concepts.
And I think sometimes we're scared to ask those questions of each other, you know, and and that's the kind of relationships we all need. We all need those kind of relationships.
Yeah. I guess one final thought that I have when it comes to these things, because as a young man, I definitely felt like God just doesn't want me to have fun, you know. Like these things sound very appealing to me, and I want to have some fun in my life, and the reality is the fun did not outweigh the heartache. And doing some chaplain work in a mental health facility allows, it kind of affords me the opportunity to see that repeated over and over again. The fun rarely outweighs the heartache. I have yet to see it. You know, even if you'll look at some sort of celebrity and they'll be like, it was a party for 10 years. But eventually the party does catch up to everybody. And we have to deal with the reality of the choices we make and the hurt too. You know, like if I'm somebody that takes advantage of women and objectifies women, eventually that's gonna catch up to me. And, you know, the fact that I've hurt so many people is going to weigh on me eventually. And it may not be in the moment. It may take 10 or 15 years. Now, if it never happens, then that's what we call mental illness. There's specific diagnoses for people like that never experience any kind of guilt or remorse. But these are things that we're just going to have to deal with, and having kind of lived it both ways, I now know that living a lifestyle with a lot of accountability, living a lifestyle where I'm putting more faith and trust in the Holy Spirit to do work that needs to be done in my life, and then actually I experienced so much more joy than I ever experienced giving into all of my kind of indulgences, like all these things that really appealed to me. Like that was not actually a very joy-filled life. I did not experience what I thought I would, So anyways, well, Seth, thank you, man. Thank you for hanging out a little bit this afternoon, and I'm kind of excited. It sounds like we get to talk to Jane Gilman, who does the music for our podcast, pretty soon. So I'm excited to have an opportunity just to talk about her life, and I think it's going to be really interesting. So that'll be cool.
Cool. Take it easy, man. Until the next time.
Yes. Until the next time, which will be about a week from now. So, all right, brother. Blessings to you and your family, and we'll chat later.
All right.
I am a pilgrim and a stranger, and traveling through this wearisome land. I got a home in that yonder city, oh Lord, and it's not made by hand. I've got a mother, a sister, and a brother who have gone to that sweet home. Well, I'm determined to go and see them, a good Lord, over on that distant shore. As I go down to that river of Jordan, just to bathe my weary soul. If I could just touch the hem of his garment, good Lord, I believe it would make me whole. When I'm dead, laying in my coffin, all my friends all gather round. They can say I'm just sleeping, good Lord, a sweet peace I have found.